Welcome back to Sasquatch Theory. In today's episode, I talk with Shawn from New Hampshire, a deer hunter whose encounters in the woods go far beyond anything ordinary, from ear-piercing screams and flying boulders to theories about biblical giants. Shawn's story will leave you questioning what's really hiding in the forests of New Hampshire. Shawn claims the Sasquatch would follow him in and out of the woods. Shawn would hear these creatures crashing through the woods like a silent bulldozer. He would also see giant boulders flying through the air, landing into the water, leaving a ginormous splash behind. The creatures would scream as they moved through the woods, leaving Shawn questioning his reality. Have you had similar encounters and experiences? If so, please get in touch with me at sasquatchtheory@outlook.com. I want to thank all the viewers and everyone who supports the channel. If you can, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to comment down below. For those of you contacting me and asking how you can help support the channel, instead of me giving you my personal address, there is the thanks button, the PayPal in the description down below, or you can simply purchase some merchandise. Alright, with all that being said, let's dive into Shawn's Bigfoot encounters from the state of New Hampshire. All right, Shawn, welcome to Sasquatch Theory. How are you doing today?
Pretty good.
Good. I'm glad to have you on as a guest. And Shawn, if you would, tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and your Bigfoot encounters and experiences from the very beginning, please.
So I'm from New Hampshire, and Bigfoot is something I thought we didn't have up here, but I was incorrect on that account. My experiences started when I began hunting. I was about 29 years old. I started later, and I had some time in my hands, and so I decided to pick it up and started spending time in the woods, not just a couple hours, but literally from sunup to sundown. And because I had no previous experience in hunting, I relied on an older fellow I knew to try to explain to me how to go about it. Here in New Hampshire, deer are not easy to come by. There's some parts of the country where they're in abundance, but that's certainly not here. And it was 10 years between the first and second deer I shot. And that's not uncommon here to be years between actually seeing any deer here, just because we don't have much of a population. We have large deer, we just don't have many of them. And it pretty much started from the get-go. I decided when I started hunting deer that I was gonna do it from a hunting blind on the ground. I started originally with a deer blind that was up in the tree stand, and closed it just to try to be as invisible as I could. And just started spending hours and days out there and just observing and listening. And right from the get-go, I thought that I was being harassed by anti-hunters because I was being followed step for step. When I would walk, I would hear walking adjacent to me, either in the shrubberies and the tree line. When I stopped, it would stop. When I would walk, it would walk. It would be the same when I entered the woods as when I left. And I generally would enter before sunup and I'd leave after sundown. And it was pretty much, it was a given. When I was going to walk in the woods or I was going to leave, something, it wasn't following me, it was beside me. And it wasn't trying to be quiet. It wasn't trying to be invisible, but I could never see it. And the reason I correlated that it may be an anti-hunter was because there were many times over the course of over 10 years, probably about 12 years total, that I hunted, that deer would come into the area and they would get spooked off by what I thought was someone using a wooden bat to hit a tree. Because that's a noise that would be made and it would spook the deer and I wouldn't get a shot at them. So it happened frequently enough that it wasn't just a fluke. it was intentionally being done to prevent me from getting a shot at the deer. And the only thing that made sense to me was someone was trying to stop that.
Yeah.
So that went on for years, but with that, there was a lot more that developed in time. There was an eeriness out in the woods that I began to connect to the occurrences of these noises or the footsteps. And it felt like when I was younger, we lived in a haunted house, and it was very similar to that kind of a feeling. It was just kind of an eerie, evil type of a feeling. In the woods would get quiet. There wouldn't be any bird noises, chipmunk noises, even insect noises. It would just get quiet when these occurrences would happen. And I thought from what I was being told, it was just part of what goes on in the woods. It's just part of the hunting experience. But slowly over time, I was becoming terrified of being in the woods. I was hunting out behind my house on my own property, and I started putting lights up on my property so that it wouldn't take me long to get to a lighted area when it came time to get out of the woods. And I was never chased by these things. Even if I ran out of the woods, they didn't run after me. But they were always pacing me when I was walking. It was very seldom that I didn't have that experience of being followed in the woods. And then as time went on, I had spent, before I started hunting, a lot of time at the hunting range. I did my own hand loads and long range shooting up to 500 yards, and had a lot of different type of rifles, different calibers. And I understood the importance of hunting with the right caliber for the right size game and so forth. And I was hunting with a 308. So it was more than adequate for hunting deer. But over time, the deer I hit, and I would hit them hard, and they'd be on next to this ridge. And when you shot them, they would just jump over the ridge to the other side. And that was to be expected. But what wasn't was that time and time and time again, I would go back to retrieve them, and they wouldn't be there. And it really got frustrating, and it really made no sense to me, because there'd be a blood trail, and a good blood trail leading up to where they would be located. But then it'd be like they just got beamed up. They weren't there. Blood trails stopped, and they were missing. And I wasn't looking for anything like footprints or anything, because it wasn't on my radar. I was up against something other than just learning the ins and outs of hunting. I was making mistakes. Somehow I was doing something wrong. The other thing that would occur, and it was quite often, I described it as a bulldozer coming through the woods. It would sound like some large piece of equipment were just coming screaming through the woods, and the noise wasn't from equipment. It was just that the trees that were coming down made it sound like something large was moving through the woods, taking them down. They were crashing down. I just said it sounded like a bulldozer coming through, because it'd be like a bulldozer knocking a bunch of trees down, making a path. That's what it sounded like. It just being knocked to the ground. Again, I had no explanation for what that could be. At that point, I knew it wasn't anti-hunters, but I couldn't really process what that noise was, what even would come close. There were other times where there would be boulders that would go flying through the air. A lot of them would be headed in the direction of a swamp, was adjacent to the area that I hunted in, and they make a big splash in the water. But these weren't just like rocks that you and I could pick up and throw. These are stone wall rocks. They're large rocks. And I had no idea what could throw them through the air in that fashion. But yet it kept occurring. And There was a smell from time to time, and it wasn't always. I just thought there were skunks in the area because it had a skunky smell to it. And again, I can't say it wasn't skunks, but that was a common occurrence when these things would happen. And it just went on and on over time. And it was very frustrating for me because I'd hunted other places and was able to shoot deer and retrieve them, but for whatever reason around here, it almost seemed impossible to do. I wasn't doing anything different at this point. A number of years had gone by, and I'd learned how to be an effective hunter and be invisible in the woods, but it got to the point where not only would it follow me when I entered the woods, but after I was in the woods, it would walk up to me. This would be when it was still dark out. And it would walk up right to the blind. It couldn't have been more than inches away from me many times. And then it would just walk off and leave me there shaking. It's just what my body would do in reaction to it, would shake. I asked my buddy who was teaching me how to hunt, and he says, "Oh, it's some wild big game that's you've become a challenge to, and it's challenging you, and being a deer or a moose or something." But the way it made me feel never made any sense.
So do you feel like they were targeting you specifically?
Yeah, I do, looking back, and not for anything more than harassment, though. Because now that I know, in hindsight, and what I know about the whole topic, number one, it seems as though all had to do with protecting the deer, that they had some interest in the deer. And I was something that would come between them and the deer. But not to the extent that they ever attacked me. But it seemed like they wanted me out of the woods more than anything from a harassing standpoint. All the deer that went missing that I shot, knowing that they eat them, it all makes sense. What didn't make sense at the time and still has me question some of this is, if it was all about the food supply, then why wasn't I a food supply? How was I any different than the deer? And when I started thinking about it in terms of that, then they aren't just a wild animal. There's some level of intelligence. But moreover, why or what possibly could have been conveyed to them that says not just me, but humans in general aren't a food source? So again, it begged a lot of questions. And eventually I left the woods. The last encounter I had, and again, I wasn't looking in terms of this being anything other than a wild animal somehow having some kind of a negative experience with. I decided to enter the woods in a different direction. And bear in mind that at this point, we're like 12 years of hunting, not just in this area, but a lot of different areas. But this area is just different. The feeling out in the woods is different. Not being able to retrieve the deer, something different going on here. And the level of eeriness associated with the woods at certain times I had never experienced to that extent. There was one small piece of woods that I'd been in, which was similar. I've since found out they have something going on there, but it was just the two of them, but nothing to the extent of what I experienced behind my own home. So what I did, I decided to enter from a different direction, and I bought an electric scooter. And I'm in a remote area, and I'm on the second highest point in the area I live. So I'm on a mountain. There's houses out here, there's farms dating back 100 years, dairy farms and things like that, but it's a remote area. And I live on a dirt road, so I decided to enter that particular piece of land from a different direction after all those years. Because I was happy with just sitting in the blind, even with all the Native experiences. It was just enjoyable for me to be out there when it wasn't unpleasant, just to watch the wildlife and just experience nature. And in any event, so I bought an electric scooter so I could be somewhat stealth in my entering the woods in a different location, about a quarter mile away. And I went out before it was light out, and I entered from another direction. It would take me about a quarter miles away to get to it, and then a little over that when I was to hike. I planned on going in, waiting when the sun came up, and then coming into the location from a different direction. But I got in the woods, the sun was still down, and put my back against a tree. It was still dark, and was going to wait for the sun to come up to make my approach. And then I heard from a distance the thing was coming towards me. It was walking, that slow, methodical, just steps, and it's it's on 2 feet, and it's coming towards me, and it comes just under, I'm gonna say, like 20 feet from me, and it sits down and puts its back against the tree. It's sitting exactly the same way I am. So I took the gun and I pointed it in its direction in the dark. And when the sun came up, I was just going to pull the trigger. Again, I'm not thinking it's anything other than some kind of wild animal, as bizarre as that sounds, but it just didn't cross my mind I was dealing with something like Sasquatch. So I pointed in its direction. And then when it lined up with it, it let off a noise that I described to my wife later as a woman being knifed to death. It was screeching. It was so intense and it was so loud. It shook my organs. It vibrated my bones. I've never felt anything like that, ever. And when it got through, it stood up and it just walked off. And I left the woods and I was done hunting.
Yeah. And why do you think the creature screamed?
Because I pointed a gun at it.
Yeah. And these deer that you were shooting, what kind of caliber were you using?
.308 round nose.
Yeah. So you would go look for the deer and follow the blood trail, and whenever you got to the end of the blood trail, you didn't find anything?
No, just stopped.
Yeah. And how exactly were they moving the deer, corralling them, as you would say?
So I stayed out in the woods way after dark, just to hear what was going on, the direction of the deer, how they were traveling and stuff. And there was another peculiar thing, and that was I had picked up on, there was the snapping of branches, and it was being done, and it was having an effect of corralling the deer. So they'd be coming into my area, and then there'd be either that knocking of like a bat on the trees. Over time, that went away, and then there was this breaking of branches, large branches, but it got the same effect. It took the deer in the direction that they would be coming, and it steered them off. And I wanted a better idea of what that was going on, because, again, on the premise that this is another deer or something else of an animal nature that was affecting these deer, I thought maybe a dominant buck or something was steering the herd around to protect it. And in the darkness, I could hear exactly that happening. There was something very large out there that was actually steering the deer. And it was diverting them from where I was hunting. And it happened often enough that it became pretty obvious what was going on, that was occurring. And again, something I hadn't experienced anywhere else, but I spent so many years in the woods, so many experiences, that over time you start to figure certain things are going on. There was something else, and that was at one point I tried to bring some, I knew there were bear in the neighborhood, and it was close to 50 pounds of donuts each time I'd bring them out there, because we had a local donut shop and they had a lot of extras they would throw away, and they were keeping them for me. And somewhere between 25 and 50 pounds each when I'd drop them off. And the next morning, they would all be gone. And I never did find a bear track, a bear scat. I never could understand what was eating them. But in time, I've learned about the gifting and feeding these things, and I was probably not recommended to do so, but I did it for a long time without even realizing, maybe creating more of a problem for myself. I suspect that whatever it was that was in the woods out there was eating all of those donuts as well.
Yeah, very well could have been. What else happened after this?
So what ended up happening was I left the woods, and then my son had gotten old enough that we got into racing, and we ended up traveling the country racing, and being in the woods was the first thing for my mind. I wasn't going to go out there anymore. I wasn't going to hunt. I had no interest in telling anybody about anything. It just never made sense to me. And then we raced for quite a while. My son was old enough that he had gone off to college, and we had about 5 years ago something had occurred where gray squirrels and chipmunks and the red squirrels and stuff, there was just an overabundance of them. They were everywhere. They were terrorizing people's homes and their attics and their garages. It was just nuts. And I started trapping them. And one of the traps I had, I was securing them to a tree with a chain, and it had gone missing. And I walked out in the woods thinking something. Now this trap was almost 6 feet in the air, and it was nailed with a chain to the tree. And so when it went missing, it didn't make much sense. But I figured somehow something got out of the bear or something and dragged it into the woods. And I walked in the woods to try to retrieve it. I didn't find it because I didn't go any further in the woods than probably 50 feet before I felt that feeling that I felt from years earlier. And I was determined to find out what it was. And that kind of set me on a 5-year quest to figure this out. I did not expect for it to be Sasquatch, but it's really the only thing it leaves. And it may be something even more in my area. Do you want me to touch on the other part of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I started searching the internet to find out what all was going on. And then it became pretty obvious that I wasn't alone in my experiences. And I even found a documented case some 20 years earlier, only a few miles from where this was happening. It made its way onto the internet. I had run into it turns out to be one of my neighbors, one road over while I was doing this research at Tractor Supply. He was in there getting some live traps, and I was doing the same. And when I found out that he used to hunt in my area and had a trap line, I asked him if he had ever had any unusual experiences in the woods. And he looked down at the floor and he looked up at me and he said, "Are you talking about Bigfoot?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. Is that?" He says, "We have it up there." And that led to me talking to my neighbors, 3 of my neighbors, all of which came clean. One guy's lived here for 40 years. He described it like I did as a bulldozer coming from the woods. He says, "When I hear the bulldozer coming through the woods, I just leave." So even the neighbor who had only been here about a year at that point had already concluded that there was Sasquatch activity and that they were having issues with it. But yet I could go to the neighbor 2 properties down in either direction. They would think I had 3 heads, that they had no experiences. Some have been there longer than I had, and some were the farmers, the old farms. They knew nothing about it. So that they began to make me question that, number one, the intelligence of these things. Why was I not a food source? But number two is, why are they staying in certain tracts of land? Because it seemed to me, based on the people I was talking to now, I could almost map out the area. And I found it had to do with a conservation easement piece of land where houses had been built over time. And it seemed to be residing within those parameters. So why wasn't it leaving? How can this thing have territory? And how can it know what it can and cannot eat? That just doesn't make sense. So we were asking questions, and word got out in the family that I was looking into this. My mother's sister, my aunt, had heard and said that she knew somebody from another state, one state over from us, whose husband had an experience in something that he pursued for 10 years, trying to figure out what had happened. He had been out hunting. Something was aggressive towards him, started throwing rocks at him, and he decided he was going to find out what it was. He actually owned an archery shop, and he was third generation business. He was a Cherokee Indian. And anyways, my aunt said, you probably want to talk to her. He's since passed away, but he had quite a bit of information that he shared with people around him. So she gave me a call, and she told me what she recalled of everything. And when she got finished, it was so similar. I was just crazy. It sounds like the same kind of stuff that I was going through. I asked her what part of that state, which was Massachusetts, did he have his experiences in? Where did he hunt? Was it near their archery shop or their home? And she says, no, he actually, his hunting spot was up in New Hampshire at a relative's property. Turns out that it's it's the same area that I'm having my issues. It's just crazy that developing that way, that someone from another state in their story would coincide with mine in the same area, but it did. So that's not the craziest part of this. So that was all well and good. I wasn't going back into the woods. I wasn't going to be quiet about it either. So I started talking to people. And like I said, it became obvious to me that where these things reside, it's almost like they have permission, and there's territory and there's boundaries. And for whatever reason, which I think I have some thoughts on it now, what's going on, but they're allowed to do what they do. And I think we're impacting their, at least here in this area, I think we impact their food supply, and they're protecting it. I think that's what they're trying to do with me, just get me out of the woods. But in any event, so I had a bunch of people over, bunch of men. We having what we went out to like a Bible study, and it was outside of church, and it was being current political events and just trying to understand times we're living and stuff. And I knew like half the group, and others were friends of friends who had come. And there was a pastor who had asked if he could be part of it, who I had met. Been pastor of a church for about 20 years, not far from where I live. And I said, sure. We had struck up a friendship, and he just wanted to see what's going on with the group, and how the whole thing was put together and so forth. So he comes, and we have our get together, and everyone's leaving, and it's dark out. There's two people left, the pastor and another friend of mine who has a business in town not far from here. And the pastor leaves, and you see his headlights go down the road, and we see headlights coming back up the road shortly thereafter, and turns in the driveway and drives up and walks up to the front door and knocks on the door. It's the pastor. He said that he had just had a werewolf jump on the hood of his truck. And he drove off. I haven't talked to him since.
And
the interesting part of it.
What did he describe whenever he said the werewolf jumped on his truck?
So that's all he said. And quite honestly, in I didn't really even take it that serious, which I can't even believe I didn't, because people weren't taking me serious about the Sasquatch thing. And I was kind of put out about that, but he said that, and that should have rocked my world, but it really didn't. It didn't compute. Maybe I had so much on my plate with the Sasquatch thing. I had no idea what that could be. He didn't describe it other than what I said, and then he left, and I hadn't seen him since. I know he did say something to someone. It came through a third party. Something odd is going on in that part of the state. So a couple years later, this was last year, we're at our camp, and my wife had a childhood friend over, and we were sitting around chatting about things around the fire. And then this whole subject got brought up, and her friend was listening. And I talked about the past who had came and commented about the werewolf jumping on. He didn't say how big it was. He just said werewolf. And as I'm telling the story, her friend interjects and says, well, when I was 12 years old, so she's some 50, 55 or 56 at this point, she recalled the story because she said she'll never forget it. She's 12 years old. Her father was in a band in this town, and she remembers them telling him about the werewolves in town. So that particular person was part of one of the founding families of the town. So they go back to its origins. And it's just kind of crazy that the confirmation come in that roundabout way. Now, I had two instances of something about werewolves here, which I'm presuming are going to be the dog man, is what it is. But I haven't personally, and I don't know, maybe I was encountering that in the woods as well, and I just didn't know. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's probably a lot of people that get paralleled out by what they think to be Sasquatch, and you never know if it's a dog man.
Yeah, I mean, how big are they? How small? I mean, there's a lot of strange stuff around this area, and from talking to some of the locals, they attribute to the Abenaki Indians a lot of stuff. This was a high place for the area, and there's a lot of Indian stories from the past. In the area where all this is occurring, I came across what looks to be a burial mound. It's not normally occurring, that's for sure. I'll share with you some pictures of it, but it's probably just about 20 foot tall or so. It's a rounded mound. And it's perfectly circular. And it's just out of place in the woods. It's not an area that normally you would even see because it's so far out in the woods, but they put like a 7-mile nature trail out there that they developed over time. And when the leaves fall off the trees, you can see it if you know what you're looking for. And I got to believe that this is all tied together.
Yeah, it very well could be. You sent this photo over of this strange figure in the tree line. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So what happened, that was my cousin. So on the timeline, how this happened was, I'll talk about my wife's experience first. So my wife really didn't believe all this had happened for those years, and it's not something we talked about. And then when I get busy looking into it, it's all I talked about. And she would just kind of give me the hairy eyeball. And then last fall, we were out on our boat on one of the rivers that's probably about 10 miles from here. And we'd never been on that river before. And there's nothing going on out there. It borders a pretty big city, but it's on the outskirts of the city. And as we were going up, I was testing a new electric outboard, which is silent. It's electric, so it's got no noise to it. And then as I rounded one of the bends, I heard some trees come down. It was very reminiscent of that noise from the past when I used to hunt, like a bulldozer come from the woods. So I reacted to it. I said out loud, "That Sasquatch, I'm getting out of here." I started to turn the boat around and then realized what I was doing. And I just stopped myself, like, it's ridiculous. It's not going to harm me. And then when I looked at my wife, she was white. And she just simply said, I saw her. I'm like, you saw what? She said, I saw it. I saw the Bigfoot. She actually looked like Smurf, had white on its face, and it was big. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing from her. And then I said, well, let's just drop anchor over here and let's listen. And we sat there and listened and heard and watched a bunch of trees come down, about 20-foot tall trees, one after another. That noise continued. And then the thing left the woods, and when it left, all the wildlife noises came back and everything. And then I wanted to talk to her about it, but she actually was angry. She'll talk about it now, but it's not something she wanted to talk about. I was very surprised to see her reaction, and that was anger and not wanting to talk about it. So I did tell her, the last thing I said was, I'm going to look this area up, and based on my research in the other areas that this is occurring, that plot of land is going to be a state national forest or some kind of conservation area. And when we got home, I brought the area up, and it was on the edge of a conservation district. So it was consistent with what I'd learned in other areas in the state as to where this goes on. So around the same time, and I didn't know this, about 20 miles away, a cousin of mine, he's just a little older than me, and he's been hunting for some 50 years. And he does a lot of fishing. So I get this picture of something texted to me from him. And he says, I took this while I was out fishing. And my response was something to the effect of, well, wow, that's crazy. What is it? He goes, I don't know, but it didn't look right. It was about 8 foot tall. And it was standing in front of me when I looked up. So I took a picture of it. He says, I took 2 pictures. It doesn't show up on one, but it does show up on this other one. And he said, I forgot I had taken the picture. So I was just cleaning my phone out. I needed more space. Then I saw it, and I realized it was something you'd want to see. So it seemed odd at the time, the way he conveyed that he had forgotten he took it. Because how do you forget an experience like that? And he's an experienced hunter. He knows the difference between a bear, a moose, a deer. He said no idea. I think what he said exactly was, it shouldn't have been there. So this spring, I get together with him, and we went over he's going to show me where he actually took the picture. And it's very misleading, because if you do, and I don't even know why this is the case, if you take his phone and take a picture of that area, it looks like that creature's 100 yards off. But it wasn't. It was 100 feet from him. And as he was telling me about the whole ordeal, as we were on the water in this channel, and I can see why he figured it was as tall as it was, because the way the bushes are and the way it dips down right there. So what became apparent from his conversation was that when he took the second picture and it showed up on the phone, he doesn't remember anything of the encounter until 2 months later, when he comes across the picture in his phone. In other words, when he looked away from the thing, it was stricken from his memory. He went directly from looking at it, having taken the picture, to looking down and grabbing his fishing pole and going fishing. Or something that led him to the point of fishing, where he started fishing and fished the rest of the day, came home, and never thought about it again until he came across the picture in his phone.
Yeah, that is strange. So he saw the creature with his own eyes, looked down, and continued fishing. Do you think perhaps this has something to do with missing time?
I do. I didn't before, because I had nothing to gauge that with, but I absolutely do now. And I have to wonder how many people have had encounters and have no recollection.
Yeah, that's a good
And
point.
if it wasn't for that picture, who's to say he would ever recalled it?
Yeah.
Now the picture, it's kind of bizarre. So now it makes more sense to me. So when I see pictures, you see pictures like Sasquatch or Dogman or something. They're always blurry or something like that, right? Oh, they're making it up because look at how blurry it is. Nothing. Well, that's exactly what happened with this picture. That phone should not have taken a blurry picture, but it did. And it gives the illusion that's way far off when it's not, which is strange as well.
Did your friend ever go back to the area to do a comparison?
Well, I went with him, my cousin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your cousin.
Yeah, we just went down the channel. So at that point, it would have been 50 feet from us. It was close enough to see the terrain, to see the bushes, the exact area. And so you can have an idea of size and so forth. So it would had to have been that large.
Yeah, and you said he took another photo and it wasn't in there?
Yeah, he took 2 photos. It only shows up in one, and it's in a state forest. It's right on the edge of state forest. Same deal.
Yeah, whatever it is, it looks pretty big. I can't say for sure because it's a little blurry, but I mean, you can definitely tell something's there, and even the trees are a little blurry. Yeah, it's just a shame he didn't get video of it.
He's lucky to even get this. I'm now knowing what I know, and the fact that what could have happened, to have anything is, I think he's lucky to have. But yeah, video, whatever, would have been nice. It's got pointed ears. It's not a Sasquatch.
Yeah. So, what else happened after your experiences? Did you ever run into the creature?
No, no. There's ongoing issues in the woods around my house. It never stops. It's more seasonal. In the fall, it tends to really get active more so. We also have something else around here where we hear, it sounds like chimpanzees out in the woods. Haven't heard them this year, heard quite a bit last year. And that would go hand in hand with the time I spent in the woods, was there's this owl noise. It sounds like an owl. It's just too loud. It's like it's too big. It doesn't make sense that it can be that loud. It sounds like what's coming out of would have to be giant. And we hear all sorts of owls and other things go on around here. It's a different type of a sound too, but there's that owl. And when we'd ever go, my dog's attracted to it. He tends to want to wander off towards its direction, which is strange because he's usually afraid of everything.
Yeah. And what do you think the Sasquatch are? Where do you think they came from?
So I'm a Christian, and I look at it from that perspective. And I prayed after having all these experiences and knowing what I knew firsthand. And I said, God, you got to show me where these show up in Scripture, because this doesn't make any sense to me. My conclusion is that they're the same giants that David battled, David and Goliath. That Goliath was a giant. He had hair like a goat, just like Esau. And when you start to understand that in Scripture, they're an adversary of the Hebrew people and variations of them. In other words, I think there's all sorts of cryptids in Scripture, and they're referred to as beasts of the field, fowl of the air, and fish of the sea. So if we just focus on the beasts of the field, which I did, then they show up in Genesis. And it is said that Satan is the most cunning of the beasts of the field. Now, that's something separate than animals, and he's a part of whatever they are. And I believe we're talking some modern iteration of something from back then. And I think Hollywood is kind of laughing at us about them. I don't think they know full well of what all's going on. Beauty and the Beast, The beast is a Sasquatch, and the rest is pretty self-explanatory. But I did a deep dive into that. I've been on this for like 5 years now. There's a lot of information in scripture in regards to the beast of the field. They're not the original giants that were the Nephilim, that were the cloud eaters, that were 500 and they were hundreds of feet tall, but there's something thereafter that's large. Nimrod is another one. If you look about Nimrod and then the different areas that he's involved in, the towns or the cities or whatever it is that he's a part of developing, like Nineveh, Jonah and the whale. Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh. Something going on in Nineveh. He didn't even want to go there. And that's where Nimrod was. We're told, for example, that David and Goliath looked like us. He was just bigger. That doesn't seem to be the case. And these things, I believe, have been around since back then. And it would answer the question as to why they have territory. Because those giants that God had told the Hebrews to go in and take and do away with after they left Egypt and the promised land, they didn't follow through with that. They only get rid of half of whatever was there. And then they made some kind of a covenant with them. So if these are those things from back then, and they have a legal right from ancient times to be alive because the instructions were to kill them and they didn't, it seems that could carry over into modern times as to why they would have territory and why we would be off limits and why they're more than animals. They're actually partially human, it would seem. There was some genetic testing done through David Paulides, and I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding it. And the results are being held and this, that, and the other. But he has let out that it came back as 90% human on the mother's side, on the matriarchal side. So these beasts of the field from scripture, these Sasquatches roaming the earth today, may very well be part human.
Yeah, that is creepy to think about. And I really admire David Paulides and his work, and he's out there trying to figure out the truth. And, no one really knows truly what's going on, but, there's some people that are deep diving into it, trying to figure it out.
I'd encourage people from the biblical perspective to do some research into it. I did deep dive. I could go on and on and on. I just give you some highlights of it, but look in the book of Enoch as well. There's quite a bit of information in there if you start looking, where he talks about the white, red, and the black bull, and then what all went on then leading up to Noah and then thereafter. It tells a story, a really kind of a bizarre story, but reiterates the story of scripture in the garden, and that something really bizarre happened beyond what we're led to believe, or I was ever led to believe in church. And the thing is it kind of fits this narrative. It's not like it's a stretch. It actually makes sense of what all is going on with these things. And that is that when Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel, the genealogy of Cain, it doesn't have Adam as his father, but Eve as his mother. Abel has Cain, Adam and Eve as being Abel's mother and father, and then later on Seth, Adam and Eve are his father. And then in my research of the occult and some Satanist religions and the way that they do their genealogy, it goes back through the mother, and they claim that Eve is their mother from the garden, which sounds crazy until you start going at what all happened with Eve, because it says Eve was beguiled by Satan. You find out Satan's a part of the beast of the field, and beguiled is a sexual act. Cain kills Abel, goes to the land of Canaan, where the giants are, and the beasts of the fields, which are one and the same, and then comes back with a family. So Enoch, the book of Enoch goes further in there when it starts laying out those early events. That is kind of crazy because it indicates, so take a look at like bestiality, right? Just by definition, that would have to do with the beast. And what it's looking like is that's exactly what happened. And these things had offspring that were tied into the genetic Adam and Eve's offspring. And then from there, branch off into a whole bunch of different things. So you could call them cryptids, which may be the reason for the flood and Noah and the ark to get rid of all that. But it's not gone afterwards because we get giants or beasts of the field or Sasquatches showing up after the flood. So that's a whole nother, I can go on, but the more you look into it, put the pieces together, and I encourage folks, maybe it's where they ought to start looking, because it kind of paints a much bigger picture. It really starts to make sense of what might be going on and their supernatural ability and maybe why they have it, their origins, the fallen angels, and what happened there in the garden. And then, but you're going to have to get that from outside the church. You have to get it directly from your scripture because you're not going to be taught it.
Yeah, I appreciate you for sharing that with me, Shawn, and I think it very well could be true. There's a lot of clues in the Bible, and I know a lot of people don't believe, but there are a lot that do believe. So I think it's important to note, and I call it ancient history, but other people say it's not real. It was written by man, but I think it's the Word of God, and a lot of things that are in the Bible really reflect on our life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, this was one that I basically challenged God on to say, show me where this fits. I never dreamed it would fit the way that it does. And one more piece of that information is this. So I did a lot of research genetically and then medically and scientifically. And again, I'm not going to get into all of it. I can't, there isn't time. But if this did in fact happen, then there would be some evidence. If this interbreeding or selective breeding happened in the garden and thereafter, there'd be some kind of evidence in it, in our own DNA or bloodlines or something. And there is something that may very well be another piece of that puzzle. So when I looked into this further, I wondered if something like this did happen. So God goes to the trouble of saying that he created Adam and Eve in his image. So it's in comparison to something else. Again, it says Satan is the most cunning of the beasts of the field, and we find out the beasts are something other than animals. There's something different. There has to be some compatibility between the two, and we know from the fallen angels on through that somehow they're having offspring with angels. So that has occurred in various ways. So what I found out was when they type human blood, so you got blood types A, O, A, B. It's interesting that type O can donate to any other blood type, but it can't take from any others. So there's something very unique about type O blood. And moreover, there's something even more unique about type O negative. And when you check into the negative positive factor of blood, it has to do with the RH factor, RH negative, RH positive. That RH factor is indicative of antigens. So if it's RH positive blood, there's antigens in the blood. Well, those antigens are tied to the best that they could type it, which wasn't perfect, but something close to that was the R's for Rishi monkey. So RH positive is something similar to Rishi monkey that left antigens in the blood through time, over time. So again, here's science confirming some of this real bizarre possibilities of what these things may be. And another interesting bit of information I came across about this. So it seems like they have territories, they have areas that they have permission in. and it's definitely tied to the state national forest. And Teddy Roosevelt's the one who created those forests. But yet, there's a story it's in the National Archives. You can research this, that he was the great hunter, as it goes. But yet, he talks about one of his favorite hunting guides who had a friend that was killed by a Sasquatch. So why wouldn't Teddy Roosevelt then have declare war against these things? He acknowledges they're real. He writes about them in his diary. Instead, he gives them a safe haven.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of people say they set back land for the Sasquatch and cryptid creatures, and it's really hard to determine for sure.
So he wouldn't have had a choice in the matter if this was something that was contracted with back in time when they were tasked with taking down the giants in the promised land after Egypt, and they didn't follow through, and God said, it's going to be a problem later on because you didn't do this. Then with those agreements that they made with them, they don't give us detail of what those are. Then Teddy Roosevelt he would have to comply with them. And it brings me up to because so many different stories now and people I've talked to and bits and pieces of this. Like there was this other old timer I talked to and I was telling him what I had discovered. He said when he was a kid, he remembers back in high school, they had a history teacher and she would teach about how when they originally, the settlers in this country came here, they weren't as much after and trying to do away with the Native American Indians. They were after the giants that the Indians were protecting.
Why do you think they were protecting the Indians?
Well, I'll just say this. So about 5 years ago, there was an interview with the Cherokee Nation. It was done through a Christian network. It was Thomas Horn. It was on one of Thomas Horn's programs. And they had him for a sit down. They wish they'd never done it afterwards. But in that interview, they said that they were the overseers of the Sasquatches. And part of the coming of age of some within their tribal people, they would have to sleep on the grave of a Sasquatch. And additionally, they were waiting to be given permission to tell the Sasquatch that they could roam the earth again. So whatever the connection is between the two, it goes back a long ways. And that was just 5 years ago. And then they refused to do any more interviews about it. But obviously, there's more going on there.
Yeah, it does sound like it. Do you have anything else that you'd like to share with me, Shawn?
No, just encourage people to do their own research on this, and if you're a believer and if you're not, pray and ask for some direction on this because it really doesn't make any sense otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate you, Shawn, for reaching out and being a guest on the show and relaying your experiences and information with me. That truly means a lot.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to have me.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you ever encounter anything else in the future, feel free to reach out to me.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you and take care. Thank you for listening to this episode of Sasquatch Theory. If you enjoyed Shawn's incredible story, be sure to like, subscribe, and share his podcast with fellow truth seekers. Have your own encounter? Reach out. I'd love to hear your story. Until the next time, keep searching, stay curious, and remember, the forest holds secrets waiting to be uncovered.